That's from Ernest Hemingway, describing the evacuation of Smyrna in 1922. It's a really haunting way to start, I know, but it gets us right to the heart of things. It grounds us in the very real, very human stakes of a conflict that didn't just start with armies, but with ideas. And these were powerful, clashing ideas that were about to set an entire region on fire.
So, let's set the scene. It's 1919. World War I is finally over, and the once unstoppable Ottoman Empire is collapsing. This creates this giant power vacuum in Anatolia, what we now call Turkey. And into this void, two powerful and totally conflicting ambitions are about to march.
On one side, you have Greece. They're fueled by what they called the Megali Idea, the Great Idea. It's this dream of creating a bigger Greek state on both sides of the Aegean Sea. And on the other side, you've got the Turkish national movement, led by a guy named Mustafa Kemal, fighting for a brand new, independent Turkish nation. These two dreams, well, they just couldn't exist in the same space. They were on a collision course, and Anatolia was going to be the battleground.
Okay, so let's jump ahead to the summer of 1921. After a whole series of really tough battles, the Greek army has just scored a major victory. They are now deeper inside Anatolia than ever before. But here's the thing. This victory has just handed them a huge make-or-break dilemma.
I mean, just look at this map. Look how far they pushed. They've taken this key railway hub at Eskişehir. The Turkish army is on the run, but it's not totally broken. So the Greeks are sitting right here at a critical fork in the road, both literally and, strategically.
So this is the big question hammering the Greek high command. What do you do? Do you stop, dig in, try to hold on to this massive new territory you've just grabbed? Or do you roll the dice? Do you gamble everything on one last, crazy daring push to capture the capital, Ankara? And maybe, just maybe, end this war once and for all.
And look, this wasn't some snap decision made in the heat of the moment. This debate gets to the very core of military strategy. It's actually a classic problem, something the great theorist of war, Karl von Clausewitz, would have known very well. It really boils down to a clash between two of his biggest ideas.
First, you've got this idea of the culminating point. Think of it like stretching a rubber band. Every attack has a natural limit. The farther you go, the more you stretch your supply lines, the more tired your soldiers get, the deeper you are in enemy territory. And if you stretch it too far, it snaps. You lose your strength, and you hand the advantage right back to the defender. This was the big argument for being cautious, for stopping the advance.
But then, you've got the flip side of that coin, the principle of continuity. This theory says that after you win a big victory, you absolutely cannot give the enemy a second to breathe. You have to chase them, hit them again, and completely shatter their will to fight before they can even think about regrouping. So the billion-dollar question is, which theory was right for this moment?
Even with the massive risks, the argument to keep going was, well, it was pretty overwhelming. Trying to hold their current position was a logistical nightmare, the defensive line was just way too long, and every single day they waited was another day for the Turkish nationalists to regroup, rearm, and get stronger. But Ankara, capturing the capital, that felt like a potential knockout blow. It could wreck Turkish morale, maybe even bring down Kemal himself. To them, it felt like the only way to get a real decisive win. So, they took the gamble.
Okay, so the decision is made, advance on Ankara. But a decision is one thing, a plan is something else entirely. And the plan they came up with was ambitious, incredibly complex, and, as it turned out, deeply flawed. You can start to see why when you look at the terrain they had to cross.
Right. To get to Ankara, the Greeks first had to get across the Sakarya River, which was a huge obstacle where the Turkish army was dug in. Looking at the map, they basically had three options. They could try a northern flanking maneuver through the mountains, they could go for a direct frontal assault straight across the river, or they could attempt this much wider, sweeping southern flank through the desert.
And what did they choose? Oh boy. They went for option 3, the riskiest of them all. The plan was a grueling march through the salt desert in the blistering August heat, then cross the river, and then, get this, pivot their entire army to slam into the Turkish flank. It was an incredibly complicated move that needed everything to go perfect.
And here's the problem. The Greeks had actually used this kind of southern flanking move before, and it worked. But trying it again meant they gave up the element of surprise. The Turks saw the huge dust clouds from the marching army miles away, and that gave them time to shift their own forces to meet the attack. Not to mention, that march through the desert absolutely exhausted the Greek soldiers and stretched their supply lines to the breaking point.
But the crazy thing is, They almost did it. They almost pulled it off. After 11 days of just brutal fighting, the Greek army captured the peak of Mount Chalsaw. They were just 65 kilometers from Ankara. They could practically see it. But that was their high watermark. They were exhausted, low on ammo, and facing a defense that just wouldn't break. The great Ankara gamble had failed.
The failure of that military campaign was a massive turning point. Within a year, the Greek army would be thrown out of Anatolia entirely. But the story of this war, it isn't just one of battlefield strategy. It's also a story of unbelievable human suffering, where it was the civilians who paid the highest price for the ambitions of these nations.
When all the fighting was finally over, a treaty in 1923 made a compulsory population exchange official. Just think about that for a second. Over 1 million people, Greeks from Turkey and Turks from Greece, were forcibly ripped from the lands their families had lived on for centuries. It was one of the biggest refugee crises of the early 20th century.
And the symbol of this whole catastrophe became the Great Fire of Smyrna. In 1922, this amazing, vibrant, multicultural city, which by the way had more Greeks living in it than Athens did, was just devastated by a fire that wiped out its Greek and Armenian neighborhoods. It was this tragic, fiery end to its multicultural history.
So you have to ask, how does this level of cruelty even happen? This quote really gets to the chilling psychology of it all. In the middle of a brutal war for national survival, both sides basically started to dehumanize the other. And once you do that, well, terrible things like deportations and killings don't just become possible, they become permissible.
The Greco-Turkish War might have officially ended in 1923, but its consequences, they were far from over. The conflict created this deep crack in the earth, a geopolitical fault line, and the echoes from it have been shaking the region for 100 years.
You can literally draw a straight, painful line from that forced population exchange in 23 through the simmering tensions and bombings of the 1950s, all the way to the Cyprus crisis in 1974, which brought Greece and Turkey right to the edge of another full-blown war. Even today, the memory of this conflict casts a long, long shadow over their relationship.
And that brings us back to where we started. And it leaves us with this really difficult question. The Ankara campaign was a military gamble, right? It was born from a clash of these grand national dreams. But as Hemingway saw on those docks in Smyrna, the bill for those dreams is always, always paid in human suffering. It's a timeless problem that forces us to ask again and again, what is the price of an idea and who is forced to pay it?